Casual Magic has been brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can get cool stuff. Use the code CASUAL to get 5% off of your sale. And by Architect, a deck hosting website that doesn't really sell anything, but they like me and I like them, so kindly use them. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we talk about the fun side of Magic the Gathering. My name is Shivam, Bhatt, and Casual Magic is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc. and Architect. Today, I have a guest that I'm super excited to talk about because I've actually been a fan of his for like a decade or something since I started paying attention to pro Magic. And because of all the pro players I've ever seen in my life, he's the only one who's actually plays decks that feel like decks I would play and like are doing things that I want to do, i.e. playing ramp and lots of dragons and big green things. I'm, of course, talking about Brian KIBLER, one of the greatest Magic players of all time and currently the attache to the great leader of Commander, Olivia Gobert-Hicks, who is probably the most important person in Magic right now. Let's be honest. Hi, Brian. Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
I don't know if I can live up to that introduction, but hello, good to be here.
I mean, dude, the first time I ever I remember watching, I think it was Pro Tour Dark Ascension. Where was that in Honolulu? That was the one you won, wasn't it?
That was one of the ones I won. Yes.
You fancy pants. Yeah. Because I remember it, I was like, holy crap, that looks so cool. And your deck was so much fun compared to like all the just like control mirrors and everything else going on. I'm like, oh, look, here's somebody who knows how to play Magic the way I remember it, which is big, dumb creatures in the middle of the table.
The funny thing is, I actually hated the deck I played in that tournament. And I hated it because it wasn't about playing big creatures. It was about playing Titans and then winning the game because you just cast a Titan. It wasn't like, you didn't win because you were attacking with dragons. You won because you just like put a Wolf Run and a Inkmoth Nexus in play.
Yeah.
And just killed them with that. But I couldn't beat that deck with any of my creature decks. And literally the night before the tournament, I had my like green-red mid-range deck and the ramp deck built, and I was like, well, if I'm going to win this tournament, I'm going to need to beat a teammate, and I can never beat a teammate with this deck. And I ended up beating Paulo in the finals in the mirror match.
Oh man, you know the thing about like the Wolf Run deck was, for me, it was like the first time I'd really seen a big creature combo deck, and I was like, this looks so cool. Primetime, one of my favorite cards of all time, and slamming. I'm just glad that you didn't do like the dude at Worlds did, the guy who won wearing his bright orange shirt. I forget what his name was, a Japanese dude. But every time he would get lands out of his deck with Primetime, he would pile shuffle. And
Junya Ianaga.
Ianaga, exactly.
Ianaga,
And he was just like, that deck, I mean, that game took like 45 to an hour more than it needed to because he would pile shuffling every goddamn time he would.
That was also kind of funny because he was playing the ramp deck and he crushed all of my teammates who were playing Tempered Steel in the top 8. Like every single one of them lost to him.
Yeah, and they were all just the slowest games I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
Short of like, I don't know, playing eggs or something. But yeah, like the thing is though, your decks have always felt like they've gone against the grain for pro players in terms of like, because pro players efficient, fast, low to the ground, whatever. And your decks have always felt like Magic in 1993, right? Like Lana War Elves, ramp, big dumb things, dragons. I don't know. It just feels like the stuff that brought me into Magic when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just like, I want to share my appreciation for the fact that it's good to see that somebody representing my style of play made it all the way to the top. It's wild because I remember the first time I ever actually saw you in person, it was at GP San Jose some years and years ago. And you were walking with like one of the Japanese dudes out of the parking lot to go to the event. And I'm walking by and I'm like, holy crap, you guys are so tall. Like, cause you know, I've only ever seen you on a stream where you're seeing like this much of a person. And you're like, yeah. And I'm like,
it is in particular between like being on, you know, on like the broadcast where you're just sitting at a table playing Magic or like on stream. You know, like you only see like the like, you know, chest up or whatever, right?
Right.
You really get a sense of what someone actually, their presence is like. It's sort of like, you know, the people who beat Olivia, they're like shocked that she is, you know, not taller.
Me? Olivia is a very tall elf. it's Yeah, dude. She packs a lot of punch in a very short package, which is pretty amazing. Um, like you started playing Magic around the same time I did, back in like Revides or something, right?
I first started playing Magic in '94, February of
Mm.
'94. So the first packs that I ever bought were unlimited.
Oh, damn.
And the first like actual expansion that I bought was Antiquities.
Okay, so you do have like a year on me because I started at the dark.
hmm
So like I guess it was like fall of '94.
So
Um
I still have like packs of Italian Dark like laying around like in boxes because like we managed to get a bunch of the Dark. Particularly
yeah,
after a bunch of the other sets, we were like, oh, we should get more of these because they're like super in demand, and the Dark was not comparatively right, like at
yeah.
all. And
Because
we ended up randomly finding, I think it was like a convention or something, Italian Dark, and just had it like in my house for years. And I like found it many years later. I'm like, well, I'm not going to open this. This is too
I mean, it could have a blood moon,
good.
or it could have like goblins of the floor. The dark was a weird set. Like the only cards I ever cared about from that was like Mazavith, and then the rest of it just
Well,
hot
there's
garbage.
Blood Moon, Mazevith, Ball Lightnings from the Dark.
Right, ball lightning was cool.
The like original art, Elves of Deep Shadow, very
Yes,
cool in the dark.
by Jesper. Like that's like the one of the first cards I was ever designed and illustrated and named by the same person.
Really? Huh? I
Yeah,
did not know that.
he drew it, he created it, and I was like, that card is also sick. It's so good. When it got reprinted later with different art, I was very disappointed.
Yeah,
Um,
the original art was just like, wow,
it was
great.
so just like grabs you, and I was like, damn, you for a dude who did that stupid word of command, two eyeballs in blackness, he definitely redeemed himself with that. Um, with the Elves of Deep Shadow. Um, so what dragged you into the game in the first place?
So I got into Magic because at the time I was like playing D&D. I was actually at a game
Mm,
convention where I was playing D&D, which I'd gotten into because I like saw like D&D books. I actually originally just bought the novel Homeland by R.A. Salvatore.
yes.
Um, and because I was at like a game shop renting Nintendo games.
Mhm.
And this is clearly dating me, right? Where you went and rented Nintendo games from like a shop
Like
that
a video repair store or
original
something.
Nintendo games, no less. And I saw this and I was like, oh, I got the book and like read it, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I'm really interested in these kind of stories. And then ended up buying like D&D books from the store, and then
Yeah.
got into that with a group of my friends, and then was at a game convention, where I was playing D&D because it was like, oh, the idea of going and playing D&D with people who were not this immediate group of people who I was friends
Yeah.
with and played with was really cool, and saw people all around the convention center like on the floor like playing this card game, and I was like, oh, what is this? This looks neat. Um, and it was so in demand then that I literally was only able to buy 3 booster packs.
Damn.
I could find 3 boosters that I could buy there.
Half of them
And
were Lance.
well, so in my 3 packs of unlimited that I bought, I got a Bayou, a Korma Spell, and a Mox Jet.
Wow!
But at
That's
the
a deck right
time,
there.
and they had like the price guides, and I looked at one of the price guides, and basically they were just priced by rarity, right? So the price guide was like, oh, well, these are all $5,
Oh,
right? And I was
man.
like, okay, I understand why this Korma Spell is $5 because it's really cool. It turns all your swamps into creatures. But this swamp, this bayou is just like a forest and a swamp, and this Mox Jet is just like a swamp that could be shattered. So why are these cool? Obviously, this wasn't immediately after opening them. This was after
Yeah.
like playing a little bit because my other people managed to get some cards and stuff, and then the first like stuff we were actually able to get was Antiquities, as I mentioned before, and we didn't know how anything worked, obviously,
Sure.
and we didn't have lands because you only get lands really like in
And
the
boosters and
regular
starter decks.
boosters and starters. So we were basically just playing all Urza lands in our decks,
Oh, my
and we just
God.
assumed colorless meant any color.
Oh, God.
And it was like, these seem really good. So all of our decks were just all Urza land until we realized that like, oh, you can't do that.
I mean, tapping for 3 of any color at any point in time is pretty
The only
good.
lands we had, right? Like,
Yeah, they were really common in Antiquities packs. They were like every other
yeah.
card in those, it felt like. You grew up in Central Mass in like New England or something, right?
Yeah, I grew up in southern New Hampshire, and I went to high school and to boarding school in Massachusetts. So
Boarding school. Man, that's another thing to date too. Yeah, I grew up in Central Massachusetts, so I remember going to video stores to rent NESs and buying D&D.
yeah, yeah.
Like, if you're, I mean, my story is very similar. Like, I bought Dragonlance instead of Forgotten Realms, but then like I heard a kid in the back of school going like, "All right, I cast a fireball at your dragon," and I'm like, I need to know whatever
What is
fireballs and
going
dragons
on
is going
here?
on. Like this, I need to be part of whatever this is. But yeah, like so. I mean, you obviously are good enough to have gotten a Hall of Fame ring, which is not as frequent as they used to be. And
Well, I don't even remember what was the last year that they even inducted people into the Hall of Fame?
Reed was like the last class.
Was it?
Yeah. So that must have been 18 or
Yeah, it was a
19.
while ago.
Yeah, it was
Because
a while
when
ago.
they made the shift to the Mythic Invitationals and MPL, they got rid of the Hall of Fame voting.
It was travesty. I mean, among all of the things that went wrong with the MPL, that was one of the ones I was saddest about, just because I like my first real pro event was going to Worlds 2011, where
Mhm.
I sat and I mean, I was just side drafting because I live here in the Bay Area and it was right there. And I'm sitting there and I'm playing just who goes drafting on Wednesdays at Worlds? It's like Team Japan, like Team Japan and Team Finland and Team whatever, because it was like the nationals, the World Tournament and the teams and whatever it
Yep.
was. But I'd never drafted before because I had gone away from Magic for like a decade and come back. I'm like, I played it on Xbox. It's fine. I can do this. Turns out, can't. Um, but it was wild because I was drafting against Shuhei Nakamura when he stood up to go get his Hall of Fame ring. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm just going to lose. Because I'm like, oh wow, you're wearing a full kimono. I speak Japanese. Let's have a conversation. It's cool. I have no idea who you are. 10 minutes later, he's like, and now one of the greatest players of all time. I'm like, well, yeah, that was a hell of an event. Were you there at 2011?
I was, yep.
Man, what is it like to play at a world or at like the top tier of a pro tour, like compared to like you've now played a lot of Commander games, you've played at my tier
Mhm.
of Magic, and obviously you've played Magic for as long as I have, but when you're there, what is that feeling like when you have to deal with like judges counting every like step you take and making sure you don't miss priority or whatever, and
The thing
while
is
the
that, like,
cameras are staring at you?
yeah, like I mean, I got into Magic, so early and started playing competitively so early
Mm,
that like it wasn't like, oh, I'm intimidated by this tournament environment in quite the same way that someone who comes in from the
mm.
outside more, like nowadays, I guess not really nowadays so much because it's very different now, but like
Like a
when they're the
younger
big
generation.
live, more of the big live events, like I had people, like ask me, oh, like, you know, when I came back into playing and like people didn't necessarily recognize me. It's very funny when people just literally don't recognize me these days because I look completely different.
You do.
And they're like, "Wait a minute, you're who?" But like, they're like asking me like, my experiences at like Grand Prix and things. It's like I won the first Grand Prix I played in.
Oh,
It was also like the fourth Grand Prix ever. I played in the first Pro Tour in the junior division, but I played in the first Pro Tour.
isn't that the one that you had to call in to get an invite?
Yes. Yeah, you literally only had to, well, not even only, because like there were tons of people who were trying to call in and play in it. The junior division was actually much easier because there were not nearly as many, kids who were going to New York to compete in this because there were people flying out from all over the country and the world to compete in the Masters division.
This was in what, 1996,
It was
95?
in 96. Yes. It was in, I want to say February of 96 was the first Pro Tour. And there was a
Mm.
huge storm that weekend. So like it was a huge hassle for anyone trying to actually travel in,
Mhm.
especially like last minute. So my experience, it was just very different than the average person that like, yeah, I've kind of been in this environment since I was a kid,
That's
right? Like you kind of grow up competing in that sort of thing, and like like I was 16 when I won the Grand Prix Toronto in 97.
Jesus Christ.
Um,
That's
so
wild, dude.
yeah. And I was 15 when I played in the first Pro Tour. So it's very different when it's like, okay, well, I've just kind of been doing this forever.
Yeah.
So it's hard to really like provide like a context for someone
That's
who
fair.
hasn't done that coming in from the outside.
Yeah, like I guess like you playing against someone like a John Finkel is very different than me playing against John Finkel, because this is somebody you've known for almost your whole life.
I mean, you were just talking about Pro Tour Dark Ascension. John and I played in the semifinals of Pro Tour Dark Ascension, and beforehand, we had people who were like, "Oh, you want to practice for your matchup," and John and I just played against each other. We literally just sat down. We're just like, we're not going to make anyone else waste their time playing against us. We're friends. We're just going to sit here and play the match before we go out and actually play the match.
What?
For each of us to practice.
That's insane. Like,
so we were basically pre-playing the match, just like on the tables to the side of the feature match area before we actually went up and played it.
What?
Yeah, well, that's sort of what I'm saying. It's like, yeah, I'm just friends with at least
sure,
the old school top players,
right?
So it's not like oh my god, I'm playing against John Finkel in the semifinals of the Pro Tour. It's like we were practicing the matchup between the two of us because that's just
because these are your friends and that's what you do,
like.
Right? I mean, there is something to be said about the fact that when you're sitting at the top echelons of any hobby, or you're at like very much inner circle of anything, of course your friends and your rival, it's like Pokemon, all your rivals are your friends. These are people you've grown up with, come up with for like that 2 hours when you're sitting there at the table. Sure, you want to kick his ass, but at the same time, these people are still like your buddies. I can hear an echo. Okay, well, hopefully it won't come through. It just seems to me though, like you still have to have a certain level of like patience and like ability to focus on the fact that you're still playing to win, even if you're testing with John like 10 minutes before you get out. Like afterwards, you still got to try to beat him.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that was the biggest challenge for me in sort of my early career when I was competing in Magic, because I kind of had several segments of Magic Pro Tour careers. There was, when I was like in high school, which was, when I played in the first Pro Tour, won the Grand Prix Toronto, and played in several other Pro Tours, and then decided, okay, I'm gonna stop and focus on the opportunities that I have right now that I won't have after I graduate, and those relationships and things like that. Then I went to college, and basically when I was in college, I was like, oh, I'm bored, so I started playing Magic again. And
what did you do in college? Did you finish?
I did, yeah. I have a degree in philosophy and religious studies. So I put that to about as much use as it has, playing games for a living. But then I was in college, and I was competing when I was in college, and then graduated, went to go work in game design, and kind of stopped competing again. And then that was I made the Pro Tour top 8 in Chicago in 2000. That was when I was a sophomore in college. And then when they announced the Hall of Fame, this was in like 2006, 2007.
Yeah.
I was just like, you know what? I want to be in the Hall of Fame. And I'm not going to make it to the Hall of Fame with the results that I had when I was playing, right? Like I had a top 8, a Grand Prix win. That's not good enough. So I sort of, made the decision. It's like, I want to get into the Hall of Fame. So I'm going to start competing again. And I started, playing in Pro Tour qualifiers, and ended up winning, I think, like the 7th or 9th or something that I played in. And then that was for Honolulu in 2009. And then I top 8'd that, and then I won Austin, which was the next Pro Tour.
Damn.
So, but I think part of what sort of changed in those various stages of my like pro career was my mentality, my like focus primarily, because when I was competing, when I was like a high school student, a lot of other stuff on my mind. Right. Same thing in college. Like my focus between events, in college certainly wasn't the next Pro Tour, right?
Sure.
And sometimes at the Pro Tour, it wasn't even necessarily the Pro Tour I was at, because I was I was in college. I'm like partying and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And not really
used to this, right? Like,
yeah, it's not really the same like level of drive and focus and desire that I had after I came back. And I was like, you know what, I want to,
Well, because you had a goal
against
to
Hall of
aim
Fame.
for, right? Like before, you're just there, you're doing the thing, you're on the track, but there's not like a thing at the end that you're trying to vie for. The Hall of Fame is a tangible reward that you're like,
Well, it
oh,
was, now it's not, but
well, I mean, but when you're competing for it, though, you
but
know,
yes.
it's like, oh, I've got like a thing I want to get to, and there's like actual here like stats and stuff that I need to do to get that. So I've got goals that I need to attain to try to get this. I know that there were a lot of pros who kind of came back, like were in that first generation that came back because they're like, oh, the Hall of Fame is here. Well, I want to be a piece of that, and I want to like get in on that. So that means they started like ramping up again. And I mean, obviously, not everybody can be like Finkel and have 3 Hall of Fame careers at different stages of his life, which is insane. But like, yeah, you came back and you definitely just started like dashing straight forward because after like 2011 or something, I heard your name at the top tables a lot, man.
Yeah, it was the period between like, when I started competing again, what was it? It was like 2009.
Mm.
And then 2009 to, I would say, 2012 was when I was like basically playing a ton of Magic, and traveling to basically every Pro Tour and
Oh, the
most
good old
of the
days.
Grand Prix. Yeah, and well, I mean, it was interesting because on the one hand, there was a lot of that I loved, right? A lot of that was great, but there was also, with the way that the pro system worked, it meant that in order to be able to compete for stuff like world championship spots or pro player club levels, that you needed to do like a ton of traveling to Grand Prix events specifically.
Mm.
And those were generally not particularly profitable events, to say the least.
Sure.
Like there were multiple years where I qualified for the world championship based on like my performances, and a lot of those points came from Grand Prix that I lost money
Oh, Jesus.
traveling to events, because just
Yeah.
you make top 16 at a Grand Prix. It's like, okay, well, I had to pay for flight and hotel
Right.
and food
Right.
and
You made top
everything
16 in
and
Nagoya.
decks and everything, and it's like, okay, well, you made a few $100 and you paid however much to get there, so it really has to pay out in the end. And there was that huge controversy that one year where they tried to basically retroactively change the platinum benefits.
Mhm.
I don't know if you remember the whole like pay the pros sort of
Yeah.
debacle thing. And that was like, a really, really bad example of how rough it can be to have to travel to and pay for these things without the guaranteed sort of expectation of, well, is this worth it in the end?
Yeah.
And fortunately, Wizards realized, like, hey, us reneging on these things that we had promised to these people who've already gone out of the way to travel to these tournaments
Anywhere,
and promote our
right?
game, that's probably not a good idea, right? And there were just so many ways that they tried to sort of like reinvent the system to make it make more sense both for them and for the players. And it's just a very difficult thing to do when you are primarily focused on these tournaments all around the world, and the amount of money that these people are spending to go to them is not even money that goes to Wizards, right?
Yeah.
Like the vast majority of that money is going to like airlines and hotels and things like that.
Mhm.
So it's not like, well, they can realistically defray those costs to an extent that makes sense for them, because that they're not intaking most of that, right?
Right. It's wild to think about, because like you think about all those guys from like Brazil or South America who have to fly to Japan or fly to Germany to get on these like Grand Prix and try to actually compete for like chump change, and they make like top 32, get $100. It's like, well,
Yeah.
now I'm homeless.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I recognize too that I'm speaking from a very privileged position of someone who's coming from North America, right? Coming from
Right.
the US,
Yeah.
whereas so many players from other regions had so little chance to be able to compete. And over time, they tried to do various things to make it less of a grind and less problematic for people in different regions.
Sure.
They did things like only counting X Grand Prix finishes. They did things like top point earners from regions getting invitations and such. But even then, and weirdly, that latter one made it so being in the U.S. wasn't necessarily an advantage, right? Because
Right.
there were players who specifically would categorize themselves, if they had like different nationality, as being from whatever other region or
Suddenly Shahar
country.
showing up in the Israeli flag.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, like I absolutely Shahar at least like lived in Israel for a significant portion of the year, but there'd be people who were like claiming they're a country where they had dual citizenship as like where they were from and competing for their national team or whatever when they never lived there at all, right? So it created some weird incentives, and it's a hard problem for anyone to solve. And I think that I certainly didn't envy the people at Wizards who were trying to make it so that a bunch of really smart people who have a lot of options of what they can do with their time are going to do this, right?
Trust Magic players to game the system whatever they can, right? Like,
yeah,
that's what we're trained to do. But I kind of wanted to fast forward through your career mainly because of the fact that I found a lot of things that you've like over the years, especially in like things like the Pay the Pros time or other things, you've brought a lot of really insightful thoughts and ideas to this because you also have game design experience yourself. Like you worked at Ultra Pro, right? And like worked on the WoW and Proto Hearthstone.
I worked at Upper Deck, not Ultra Pro. The funny thing is I sometimes confuse those two when I'm talking to people. I'm like, oh, we work together and I'm like, wait, no, that's just totally the wrong thing.
Yeah, but like there you worked on like the Proto WoW TCG, right? Like and like the thing that became Hearthstone.
Yeah, so I was the head designer or head developer of the original WoW TCG. That was at Upper Deck after I had worked originally on the Versus system trading card game. That was what I moved. I went there. That was in what 2004. 2005, early 2005. I moved out to California, and that's when I was working at Upper Deck. I originally worked on Versus system after I won their first pro circuit tournament. And then eventually moved on to being like the first person on the WoW TCG because I was huge into World of Warcraft then. And worked on that, then worked on some number of other new game projects that ultimately never got released. There, then went and spent a year working at a company called TC Digital on the Chaotic. It was a kids trading card game. Before co-founding the Stoneblade, where we made Ascension and Soulforge and things like that.
Right. Yeah. So you have a lot of design jobs. Was it weird to go from playing cards to having to actually make cards? Like, how much of that play translated into making cards?
So one of the interesting things is the big reason that I decided to go into game design was because at that time it just wasn't realistic to be a professional player of basically any game, right?
Sure.
Because this was like before YouTube really blew up. This was pre-Twitch.
Before Justin TV, before Twitch.
Yeah.
So I mean, we had real media. We didn't have streaming.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that was one of the interesting things was a huge part of my income even during that period came from like writing articles for Star City Games. Right. And it's interesting to see how much the landscape has changed now that there aren't even really those sort of opportunities for players now. It's entirely in content creation in essentially video form.
Support my Patreon, folks.
Yeah, exactly. And I ended up going into game design because I'm like, I want to still work in games, right? I love games, and I just I needed to do something. Like a lot of the year that I spent after I graduated from college, before I ended up moving to California, I was a pro Magic player, but I mostly played online poker. Because there wasn't enough money in pro Magic,
actually
right?
Make money, right? And poker's got actual money.
And eventually I got like really burnt out of playing online poker. I hated it. It was just kind of the same thing all the time, and
it's flavorless. It's like there's no good draft.
There's no dragons in poker, right. But so then I was like, I got an offer to come work in game design, and I was like, okay, well, this is a way that I can stay in games. And it's interesting because I'd actually gotten multiple offers to go work at Wizards prior to this, but I've been like, no, I want to be able to keep playing Magic and competing. And then amusingly enough, when I moved out to California to work on games, I stopped competing in Magic anyway.
Yeah.
In part because I was just playing too much World of Warcraft. But it is funny when I qualified for the Pro Tour again, when I decided I wanted to start playing Magic again, competing again. There was one point that I qualified for the Pro Tour, and I was practicing with Ben Rubin, who at the time also lived in San Diego, and had also worked at Upper Deck. And he was like, "Oh, you want to come down and play test with me?" And I was like, "Oh, I can't. I have a raid." And then I was like, "Wait a minute,
dude.
Okay, I gotta revisit my priorities." And that was basically when I quit playing WoW altogether.
Yeah, like, I knew like, I have an addictive personality, I know where my lines are, and I remember when I was a freshman in college, people in my dorm room, these twins from San Luis Obispo brought in their laptop, their towers and stuff and played EverQuest 24 hours a
Mhm.
day, and, like, I was in the WoW beta when it came out, and I looked at this and I was like, "I can very easily see
Yeah.
myself disappearing into this because I
Oh,
remember in Diablo, I did the same thing.
yeah, I played a truly outrageous amount of WoW. When WoW first came out, this was when I was still living in Atlanta prior to moving out. The first month of WoW release, I had 16 days played, and
Jesus
that's
Christ.
that's just like, and
That's
this was
days.
yeah, that was half the time in the month, not half of waking hours, half of the time in the month I was playing WoW. And this wasn't like, oh, I was idle with, in Ironforge or whatever. This was just actively playing basically all the time. And, I ended up like, being like in one of the top raid guilds in the world, helping lead our raids and stuff. I was like, gladiator PvP thing when, Burning Crusade came out. But like, I was just like, okay, I have to stop because as much as I enjoyed it, right? And it's interesting too, because a lot of what I enjoyed about WoW
Mm,
was some of the similar things to what I enjoyed about like Magic and other trading card games, which is figuring stuff out and like
sure.
developing strategies and such.
Yeah.
And a big part of why I was no longer enamored with WoW later on was because when they would put all the raid stuff in the public test realms and they get figured out, and there'd be like instructional videos on
Yeah,
websites.
right? Like, the puzzle's been solved.
So, like my guild was like one of the top like 10 to kill like a bunch of the vanilla bosses. We were one of the only guilds worldwide to clear Naxxramas, right? Like one of the, and we would have like spreadsheets of things and everything, and I loved that. I loved figuring that stuff out. And once it just became hope someone doesn't stand in the fire and follow this strategy that's on this website, I was just totally off it, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to net deck my raid strategy. Come
Like, come
on,
on, dude. That's like, but the thing is, though, the immersiveness and the fantasy and everything, I would have just lost my life to that game. Like, I sat down for Diablo 2 on a Friday and get up on Sunday, and
Oh
it'd
yeah.
be like, tie up the phone line for the whole weekend. And it's like,
I have
can't
I
do
have
that.
people ask me like, "Oh, you got to come back for Dragonflight? They made a Dragon expansion," and I am like, "I am now 13 years clean and sober of World of
Yeah, right?
Warcraft. I'm not going to relapse."
Hell no. No, dude.
That's basically what it would be
Well,
is
it's an
relapsing.
addiction. It's actively what I mean. I know people who've been playing WoW for 20 something years now, and it's just like this is an addiction, man. This is a problem. But and I know for me personally, like sure, there are people who can casually play and enjoy. I am not the type of person who could do that. And so I've not gleefully, gratefully stayed away from MMOs in general because I'm like, if I'm paying monthly, my Indian nature wants me to get all of my money's worth, which means 20 to 25 hours a day. And like, no, I can't do that. But like, because I remember though, you left Magic, and then the next time I saw you, you were basically like the number one Hearthstone streamer in the world, or some very high ranking person. And I was like, damn, why isn't Kibler doing like coverage or like coming back to Magic? Watsy, why are you letting this guy go to the other those guys?
It
I was
was
so
it,
mad. I
it
was
was
so
actually
mad.
it was very strange because like I had made it clear that I was open to doing coverage for Magic events, and they
You
were
would have
just
been
like,
so good.
"Nope, we're
You are
good."
good at this.
Yeah,
Mm,
I mean, and then I was doing coverage for Hearthstone events, and then I mean, I eventually did. Once they had like the MPL stuff, they brought me on to do the Invitational, and then also some of the MPL stuff, and then Worlds back in Hawaii, which I think was actually probably the best Magic broadcast of all time.
mm.
Um, and it was great to be able to come back and be part of those things. And I'm super happy to be back and involved in Magic now.
Yeah.
It's obviously a lot different capacity though.
Look, I'll be honest. When I saw you starting to dip your toe into Commander, I was honestly thrilled. I was like, "Oh wow, one of my favorite players is playing my favorite format," and it was good to see you come back to a game that I appreciate. I mean, I played a lot of Hearthstone. I played a lot of Hearthstone before Arena came out. Like when my son was born, my friend Erin, she was working at Blizzard, and she gave me a friends and family alpha to
Mhm.
Hearthstone. So I played it for like 2 3 years because I've got an infant and nothing else to do. I could play a card game with one hand. I wish it was Magic, but I understand. Um, but then like when Arena came out, I was like, I'm good. Um, so seeing you come back to Magic made me really happy. But how did you get into Commander? Because like it seems like something you'd be good at, but it doesn't seem like something that you would naturally find.
So the funny thing is that I had like 10 plus years ago, back when everyone still called it EDH,
Yep.
I had been like, maybe I'll build an EDH deck, because a bunch of the judges around the Pro Tours were playing a lot. And I was
Right.
like, this seems like it could be kind of cool. And I just could never wrap my head around how I wanted to build a deck for something that was like, I was so ingrained in the competitive mindset. And even if when I was playing competitively, I brought my own spin on a lot of different things, my goal was still always really to win, right? It
Sure.
might be to win with a certain like type of flair, but it was to win. And it was difficult for me to like not want to just go full spike mode anytime I was like building a commander deck. And I, had this like all these cards for like a Progenitus deck like set aside, and I still had them in a box, last year when I was actually digging through and building stuff. But I eventually just like couldn't really motivate myself to get that interested in it. And then it was actually last summer. I just got a random text message from JLK, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to come play Magic with Post Malone?" And I was like, you know what? Yeah, that sounds fun.
Sure. I
And
guess.
yeah, I ended up going to this big house that Posty was like renting up in the Hollywood Hills, and played my first games of Commander there because it was obviously a big like Command Zone Commander meetup. And the first game of Commander that I played was with Jacob and Sholo from Cobra Kai and their buddy. And I borrowed one of Jacob's decks because I didn't have a Commander deck.
Sure.
And like I ended up using Hate Mirage on an Agent of Treachery and then populating it a bunch of times. And I was just like, oh, this is glorious. This is just absolutely glorious. And Josh had this picture that he posted later that was just like, I captured the exact moment that Kibler fell in love with Commander. And it's me like standing over the table, like pointing at things, and like Jacob with his like head in his hands, and Sholo just like looking absolutely crushed. And it was a lot of fun. And then after that night, I had stuck around. I only played 2 games that night because it was like, I was streaming the next day and like ended up leaving still like 1 a.m. or whatever. But then I was like, you know what, I'm gonna dig through and build some Commander decks. And I built like a deck. I eventually put together my like Dragon deck as the first deck that I built. And then like went to the it was like just the Magic Vegas thing.
Yeah, it was the first time back after COVID.
Yep. And
Magic
went and played there. And I only had that one deck, and I was playing that like a bunch. And then I was like,
I beat
okay.
you. The literal only time I can say in the world I've actually beaten the Hall of Famer.
Well, the funny thing is, I think that was literally the only game I lost that week.
Yeah.
Which also I was just like, you know what? I want to play other stuff because like if I just have this one powerful deck, like it's not necessarily
fun.
It's not great. Look, for one, I just want to be able to do different stuff, right?
Sure.
And also like I want to be able to gauge to whatever it is, the table that I'm playing with. So I just started building more decks, and now I have like 10.
A Commander player does not walk around with a deck; they walk around with a table, right? Like you've always got like 30 decks on you, and like your Mo deck is like entirely fair and is still one of the most busted friggin' decks that just like frustrates me so much.
Well, that's the thing. I have come to like I've come a long way from that initial like mentality coming into Commander, and I think a lot of it is the time that I've spent away from playing competitively. Like the last time I like seriously was playing competitively was almost 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And most of that time has been spent streaming. Right. And most of that streaming is not serious competitive anything. It's trying to think of cool stuff to do that's fun.
Right.
And so my like mentality for Magic I managed to chip away at that part of my brain, right? It was like calcified from my experience as a kid playing competitively, and get back to like hey, I'm just going to do cool stuff.
Well, because like I just remember the story that like Reed and Ian Duke told me once about them trying to play Commander when they first heard about Elder Dragon Highlander. They're like, "Oh, cool, we'll just grab our favorite legends," and it's like Una, Queen of the Fae, or some other like thing, and they're like a full on like 30 counter spells and hand destruction, land destruction. I'm like, I think you missed the assignment, folks.
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, that's one of the things that I love about like the existence of like CEDH communities, right?
Yeah.
Is that if someone wants that experience in Commander, that there's somewhere that they can go and get it.
I agree.
And
that we have a place to send them stops them from pub stomping, and also allows you to experience things that you want to do. If you want to play Crazy Time Hand Destruction, go for it. Here's a place for you.
And I've had a lot of people be like, "Oh, you should get into CEDH," and I'm like, if I wanted to play competitively, I would play competitively,
right?
Like I would go back into playing tournaments because in part because like I think that like multiplayer competitive single winner type things kind of has fundamental flaws of like king making and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I can imagine playing like a CEDH tournament or something. And it's like, oh, I lost because that person counterspelled the wrong thing. And it's like, okay, that's not really my jam. Right. Like, I didn't even play like team sports, like I wrestled. Right. And it's like, it's just me and you out there,
Yeah, it's like, look, bro, the coach isn't going to help you.
And again, it would be one thing if it was like team, but it's not. It's 4 individual players, and the result of it hinges on what every decisions every individual person makes. And if everyone's into that, and that's what they want, they enjoy that experience, great. But I don't view it as like a great competitive outlet for me.
Yeah, but you've played a lot of like team Magic events, haven't you? Because I know isn't there that famous picture of you in like LSV?
That was the World Cup. That was the Magic World Cup in 2012 when I got bonfired.
Oh, what a great moment!
One of the funny things about that, a lot of people are like, you must hate miracles. I'm like, no, they're awesome. I literally would have died in that situation if my opponent drew lightning bolt, but because it was bonfire, it's like iconic.
Yeah,
right?
That's true. It's like cool.
And like that's what miracles do, is create stories. They create moments, right? And so much of that, people complain like, oh, he only one can stop that bonfire. It's like it's the same thing as any other card that you just draw from the top of your deck. Yes, right. In that particular moment, it literally didn't matter that it was miracled. If it had just been, like I said, I was at 3. It was the only card in his deck that killed me, but it created this like moment in the zeitgeist because it was a miracle and people had strong feelings about miracles. But
so cool though.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my point. Miracles are great for that reason. They create stories. They create these big moments that aren't just like, oh, I drew lightning bolt and killed you. I mean, because it is obvious that it happened because they have to show it to you off the top of their deck.
Right, exactly. And there's something about that desperation flip off the top, praying for anything, and something comes up, and it's like that's why I love. I mean, that's part of why I love Commander, and part of why I love playing without like tutors or anything, because there's all these stories that come up when you're living off the top of the deck and praying for literally anything to show up, and when it does, you feel the jubilation, and it's so good. It's so much fun. Like variance is why I play Magic, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot about my philosophy surrounding my Commander deck building, because I include basically no tutors in any of my decks because I feel like tutors create some of the worst gameplay type experiences in Commander, both because they compress the variance and because they just take a while. Right? Like how many games do you have where someone's just like, oh, I'm gonna demonic tutor, and then like you get back around to their turn, they're like, haven't found it yet. Right?
Dude,
like
seriously. Oh, the worst is when I've been like, I borrowed a deck from someone and they've got a tutor, and I'm like, oh, hang on, I don't even know what I'm looking for, let alone what is this supposed to...
So among my 10 decks, right? Among my 10 decks, I have 0 copies of Vampiric Tutor, Demonic Tutor, like Worldly Tutor, Mystical Tutor, and Lightning Tutor. None of them. Because I just think they make the games less fun.
Right.
And they, again, they do that for that the reason of taking up extra time, and because you just see the same stuff all the time.
Exactly.
Right? So
there's 100 cards. I want to see all of them.
Yeah. So I feel like they are so common, and people just view them as like, you put whatever tutors in your colors can play, and it's like you're just making your games worse.
No.
Like you might be making your deck more powerful, but that's not necessarily fun.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I run one tutor in one of my decks, and that's in my Enchantress deck, Eladamri's Call, just because I had one old border that I opened somewhere, and because I want to get my Rafik. Because Rafik makes me happy, and I slap a bunch of auras on it, and I win. And
I mean, like for instance, like my Ur-Dragon deck has Tiamat, right?
Yeah,
like
sure.
I'll have I have Tiamat and I have Magda. Those are
because they're flavor.
Yeah,
it's cool.
It's like, hey, these are like big things that are very specific in terms of like what they can get. It's not like Vampiric Tutor and Demonic Tutor are like just the worst offenders because it's like you just get whatever. It's like, what card,
I'm
It's like
getting demonic tutor for an island. Okay, great.
yeah. Well, and like that's one of the reasons. Like, I actually think that fetches are kind of another like offender in this case, but they're different in that you can easily shortcut them.
Yeah.
They don't compress the gameplay experience in a way that's like uninteresting, right? Like
Right.
you're just able to cast your spells.
Yeah.
Right. And that makes, and that can be, it's like, well, you have a more powerful mana base than someone who doesn't have fetches. Sure. Like there's any number of arguments that you can make about like power level of consistent mana bases. But it's like, you're just like, I will fetch for this land. You don't even have to go get it. You complete your turn and you say go. Right.
Exactly. Exactly. You can, it's like, there's no loss. And if I say, I'm just fetching for this forest, tap, 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 do my things. And then you guys go on and play, I will pull out the forest, say, hey, I pulled it.
Exactly.
Problem solved. But you said something earlier that I wanted to actually come back to. You were talking about your deck building philosophy, and I'm really curious about that because Commander is not like competitive Magic. Obviously, we've been talking about that. When you come to building a deck for Commander, how do you do it? What is the thing that you were looking for, and how do you how do you stop yourself from just playing the most powerful things?
I mean, pretty much all the decks that I build, I'm like, I have whatever sort of idea. I mean, obviously, like my Ur Dragon deck, it's like, okay, I'm going to build a dragon deck. And my Ur Dragon deck, specifically, I'm like, hey, I want this to be, it was my first deck, and I did just build a really powerful dragon deck, right? I did sort of have the same philosophy of like, I don't want to play tutors and stuff. It was funny. It was Sam Black, who I had mentioned, like, looking for like a Rhystic Study or something. He's like, you could just not play Rhystic Study. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, you can just not play Rhystic Study. And that's another thing, like the tutors, cards like Rhystic Study. I'm like, this is just a card that makes the game kind of tedious. It's really powerful, of course, like Rhystic Study. If your goal is to win your games of Commander, it's a great card to play. If your goal is for the people at the table and to enjoy your games of Commander, probably not, right? So I have no Rhystic Studies in any of my decks, despite having multiple blue decks. But yeah, like I'm like, okay, I want to build a deck around this thing. Like, for instance, my most recent deck is probably the best example of this is my Baru Wormspeaker deck.
Yes.
This is the deck that harkens back to what I describe as like the first like deck I built in Magic.
Can you describe the card for the kids on the audio feed?
Baru Wormspeaker is it's a commander that your worms get +2/+2 in trample, and you can spend I have it literally next to me. You can spend 7 and a green, tap to create
7 and a green.
7 and a green to create a 4/4 worm token, and it costs X less to activate, where X is the greatest power among worms you control. But
so scaled worm is your best friend.
Yeah, and it's in the deck.
Hell yeah!
So the deck is built as an homage to the very first Magic deck that I ever built. And this isn't to say like the first stack of cards to put together. This would be like the first deck that I was like, I'm building a deck, and I have a bunch of cards to build a deck. And it was literally nothing but forests, Llanowar Elves, Wild Growths, and Crawworms. Literally no other cards. And this deck is nothing but mana creatures, mana enchantments, and worms. That's it.
There
actually is a Soul Ring, because it's kind of a mana creature. It's a little bit cheating, but
it would have been there back in 1994.
But yeah, exactly. But yeah, I have like a beta Wild Growth, a beta Crawworm. I need to get a beta Llanowar Elf. I forgot to get a beta Llanowar Elf. Those are expensive though. But
yeah, I haven't been my popper deck.
And like it literally is just like I have Jungle Worm, Jodel Worm, World Spine Worm, Imperious Great Worm, everything, every giant worm basically, and that's the whole deck.
I love
and like that. So, sometimes it's just like, hey, this is an idea that I'm gonna make a deck out of. And the funny thing is, because it just has a million mana creatures and can just play giant creatures quickly, it can actually, be a reasonable deck, right? Like it's not just a meme. It's not just this thing. Like I can hand this to a person and play in like, a precon level pod, and they're gonna be at a disadvantage to like the modern precons, but like they'll still have a deck that does a thing, right?
Right.
And then like, for instance, like I built like an Ishin deck. It was the other most recent deck, and I was like, I just want to do. Basically, I was like, I want to build a non-green deck, because almost all of my decks are green. Because that is another funny story. At the World Championship in 2013, they had all of the players. There were 16 of us. They had all the players request a planeswalker of the original 5 planeswalkers from Lorwyn, and we each got like a jacket with that planeswalker on the back.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was like 12 Jaces or like 11 Jaces, something like that. Like 2 Lilianas, 2 Chandras. I guess it was like 10. It was like 10, 2, 2. And then like Craig Wesco was the only Ajani, and I was the only Garrick.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, this just absolutely checks out. Like if you had to like just guess, like the allotment would be like everyone wants Jace, a couple people want these, and then it's like boop,
the two
me and Craig,
very
and Craig, Mr. White Weenie and Mr. Green.
Yeah, Wesco is another one of my favorite players because he's got an ethos. He's like, you know what I'm going to play, and I'm going to hit you with it.
Yeah.
Oh man, his Pro Tour winning deck with the stupid lion from Theros was awesome. I love that one.
I lost playing for top 8 in that one. It was very sad.
What has been your favorite? Like, what do you think was your favorite win? The one that meant the most to you.
I mean, it's got to be Austin. Like the first Pro Tour win was, it was this, especially because it was like the second Pro Tour I played in after, in a bunch of years. It was just like really, really satisfying. Winning the, like my first like Grand Prix, for instance, was just like, I didn't even have context for it. Right. It was just like,
I guess I'm out of rounds.
I won this tournament. There's no one else to beat. But like I didn't even get a trophy for that. That was before they even had Grand Prix trophies.
Did they give you money?
I think they, but then it was $1,200. Granted, there were like 200 and something players, so it was like the size of a lot of modern PTQs.
Man.
But I did beat I think 4 or 5 of people who would go on to be Pro Tour champions.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's pretty wild, man. Like getting the Hall of Fame ring must have been nice, though. Like,
it was sweet. And so I was inducted in 2010. It was the World Championship in Chiba, and it was that was before they did like the big ceremony things at like the night before the Pro Tour. It was like basically the very beginning of the first day. They had like a opening ceremony type thing where they did the ring presentation and such. So I didn't get to do like a speech or anything. But we, like all the people who were there for the Hall of Fame thing were like all like in suits or whatever, and then just played the whole first day just still wearing a suit. I actually ended up going undefeated that day too, which was pretty satisfying. And I wore the ring the whole day. So,
dude, you know what? You're already at Worlds. That's already a flex. But having the Hall of Fame ring sets you like one step ahead. Like that's awesome though. That's so cool. Like it's neat to get recognition like that. That just like really got to top it.
One of the things that like you can tell someone who has no real idea like about Magic or like the competitive scene or anything like that. You'd be like, I am in the Magic Hall of Fame, and that's like, oh, that's impressive.
You're in something.
Like similarly, like there was actually a point when they were switching over to the MPL, they were talking about not having a world championship anymore. And I was like, you have to have a world championship.
No, you have to have a world.
I was like, you 100% have to have a world championship. If there is not a tournament called the World Championship, you are making a grave mistake. Because I can tell someone, it's like, oh, I'm a 2-time Pro Tour champion and I've won 3 Grand Prix. And none of that means anything.
You're right.
If I tell them I was the world champion, they're like, oh shit, that's cool.
Right. Same way, like I remember when Paulo won his Worlds, and he's like in Brazil or whatever, and he's like, yeah, look, I'm on a bus. I won the World Championship for a thing. Like, people understand World Championship. Those are words that have resonance. I am, of course, not the World Championship Commander, because Commander is not a thing that anybody cares about. But
there's a lot of people care about it, but it's not a championship kind of thing.
Someday. I will say this, though. It was funny as hell being in Vegas, sitting here at a table with like you, me, and like someone else, and people were coming up to like me or to Olivia to get us to sign things, and completely ignoring the fact that one of the greatest players of all time is just sitting right here.
That's been one of the funny things about like coming back into the Magic community in a different capacity, right? Like and being in different environments at things like Command Fest or Magic 30 or the event they're talking about, because And also, I look completely different than when I play competitively.
I saw your Pro Tour card the other day, and you've got like close hair and clean shaven.
Olivia sees those little pictures, and she's like, "Who is this person? Who? I've never met them."
Show host.
Yeah. And like people, like you're saying, being at those events and like people come over and like, asking everyone around me to sign their playmat and then walking away. And I'm like, okay. I mean, one of the funniest stories from that event was when I was standing in the dealer's booth, the dealer area, and someone comes up to me. I see them like looking at me from afar, and like kind of glancing at me, and eventually, like, I guess like get up the courage to come over and say and talk to me, and they're like, "Are you Kyle Hill?" And I'm like, no, I'm not. And they literally like wait a beat, and they're like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, yes, I'm sure that I am not Kyle Hill.
Oh man, you know what? That's a great place to call this a day. Thank you, not Kyle Hill, for joining me today. By the way, I saw that on my desk. I was like cleaning up, and I found this Rith the Awakener that I had you sign.
Ooh.
Because
excellent taste in cards.
Yeah, because I'm like, dude, what says Brian Kibler better than a Naya dragon that makes things? But man, thank you so much for joining me. Oh, I didn't even get to ask you about what it's like to have been a full-time streamer for like a decade or something.
It's cool. There you go. I mean, I could talk more, but
yeah, maybe we'll come back another time, because I'm really curious about that, because like you've streamed Hearthstone extensively. You haven't streamed any, because I remember watching the stream where you finally played Magic Online for the last time, fired it up, played a cube, and was like, this is garbage, and like never came back. And I was like, oh, I forgot to mention, there was one thing I did want to talk about. There was a time when there was a stupid zombie that
LifeBane zombie.
Yes. LifeBane zombie was like the one that takes green cards and white cards out of your hand and like totally ruined all your things. And I remember the day it got rotated out of standard, you posted a video with a techno song lighting a whole bunch of them on fire.
Yeah, that's one of the earliest YouTube videos on my channel. Is what I'm excited for Khans of Tarkir. And I'm like, I have give this like spiel, and then it just cuts to a video of me burning an entire pile of LifeBane zombies in like a fire pit on my roof.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was one of the first like viral things in Magic I saw. I was like, what the hell is Kibler doing? Oh God, we didn't even talk about the fact that we love techno music. But you know what, man? Thank you so much for joining me. I really, really do appreciate this. Yeah. And I would love to have you back sometime. But if people wanted to find you, where could they go?
I am BM Kibler on everything. Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all those things. BM Kibler on every single platform. You can have that on.
Yeah, you stream like every day, don't you?
I do. I stream pretty much Monday to Friday. Mostly stream Hearthstone, mixing some other stuff there. My YouTube channel is primarily also Hearthstone, but there will be some sweet new Magic content coming up in the near future. That'll be in another channel that I don't have the luxury of disclosing just yet.
Neat. Look forward to it. As always, my friends, you can find me at Gear Reporting Gears. You can find this podcast anywhere podcasts are sold, or at Cool Stuff Inc. on Tuesdays, or at YouTube on Thursdays. Thank you to my editor, EK. And remember, my friends, it's not magic without the gathering, and we will see you next time.